Am I overreacting? Like, I think my husband might be framing my 8-year-old son. 3 years ago, my son, only 8 years old at the time, was in a terrible accident that almost cost him his life. The collision left him in a coma for 2 weeks, and doctors were unsure of what his future would look like. His skull had cracked open, and there was significant damage to his brain. Multiple surgeries were required to stabilize him, and the road to recovery seemed endless. His chances of walking again, of being the active child he once was, were uncertain at best. However, by some miracle, he pulled through, and although he was left with visible scars on his face and body, the worst of it seemed to be behind us. The physical wounds healed, but the trauma left marks that would never fade. He lost vision in one eye and suffered from severe short-term memory loss. His mind, in many ways, was like a house that had been burned down. Some parts rebuilt, others left in ruins. Over the course of the following months, we noticed that his memory improved, but the small, everyday things continued to elude him. He would forget where he put his shoes, where he left his favorite toys, and often couldn't recall what he had eaten for breakfast only hours earlier. It was frustrating, but I learned to live with it. What was more troublesome, however, was his inability to keep track of his belongings. He lost things constantly: his books, his clothes, his school supplies. It was as if his brain couldn't retain the simple memory of where he had put something down, and as much as I tried to help him stay organized, things just kept disappearing. In the back of my mind, I knew this was part of the damage caused by his traumatic brain injury, TBI, and I did my best to be patient, but there were moments of frustration where I would wonder if it would ever get better. A year and a half ago, I decided to buy him an iPhone for Christmas. It seemed like a step forward, a little piece of normalcy after everything he had been through, but within 3 months, it was gone. He swore he had left it on the couch and that someone must have hidden it from him. After searching the house thoroughly, questioning our other child, and turning everything upside down, I finally realized that no one had hidden it. My son had simply forgotten where he put it. It wasn't that someone else took it, it was just gone, and I couldn't find it. For months, I spent every free weekend tearing through our home, hoping it would turn up, but it never did. Eventually, I gave up and accepted it as a loss. I felt guilty though, because in hindsight, I knew he wasn't ready for the responsibility of having something so valuable. About a year later, I won an iPad at work, and since my son was the only one in the house without a phone, I gave it to him. It became his unofficial device, and for a while he seemed to take better care of it, but then, after only a month, it disappeared just like the iPhone. Again, he swore up and down that someone was messing with him and hiding his things. I blamed myself again. Maybe I was expecting too much from him, considering everything he had been through. 3 months passed before I had the chance to sort through some laundry. I was frustrated by my husband's chaotic t-shirt drawer, so I decided to reorganize it. As I pulled out the contents, I was stunned to find the iPad buried at the bottom of the drawer, covered by old clothes. I asked my husband about it, and he seemed genuinely confused. He insisted he hadn't placed it there, and after thinking for a while, I realized that the most likely explanation was that my son had put it there himself, perhaps to hide it from his brother, then forgotten about it. But then, something happened that made everything more complicated. Tonight, after searching through my husband's car for something, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. The trunk of his car is an absolute disaster. Papers, grocery bags, shoes, water bottles, coffee mugs, and items that have been there for who knows how long. I found my son's iPhone, the very same one that had gone missing almost 2 years ago. I stood frozen, staring at it. I knew without a doubt that my son hadn't put it there. He's never in my husband's car, and no one else ever goes in that trunk except my husband. It's 1 a.m. now, and my husband is snoring away, completely unaware that I'm lying awake, questioning everything. Was he hiding these things on purpose? Was my son right all along? But if he was hiding them, why? What would be his motive? Or could it be that he simply doesn't remember what he did, that his memory really is that bad? Could it be possible that his ADHD is causing him to misplace these things so often and he genuinely forgot? The doubt is gnawing at me and I can't stop wondering. Some context, my son is my husband's stepson. This makes the situation even more complicated as I can't ignore the possibility of underlying tension between them. I haven't had a chance to talk to my husband yet. He left for the gym before I woke up, but I can't get the thought out of my head. As I reflect on everything, I realize that both times I found the missing devices, they seemed completely unused. They were dead, which is why Find My iPhone didn't work. When I finally got the iPad turned on, it showed all my son's search history. The iPhone 2 had a notification on the screen that it was a lost device with my number displayed as the contact. Furthermore, my husband had never been involved in setting up the devices or managing passwords. He's generally pretty relaxed about that kind of thing. He never monitored any of the kids' phones, and he certainly didn't pay attention to the technical details. What's more, when the devices were lost, my husband never once got angry with my son. Neither of us blamed him for losing them. Even when I mentioned that I blamed myself for giving him such responsibility too soon, he didn't criticize. The only thing he ever said was, well, he knows that if he loses it, he won't get another one. That's how we handled things with all the kids. If you lose it, it's gone. It's a simple, clear rule. What really adds to the confusion, though, is that my husband bought the iPhone for my son and continued to pay for the phone line all this time, never canceling the service. He never once blamed my son's brain injury, despite the fact that his cognitive struggles are clear. He's always said that my son is smarter than most kids and more athletic, and that I use his accident as an excuse too much. One last thing. Some people commented on how it seems impossible for my husband to have forgotten the phone was in his trunk. But the truth is, the trunk is a dumping ground for all the mess that accumulates in his car. It's not a place where things are kept in order, and it's filled with items that he never takes care of. When I found the iPhone, it was buried under a pile of junk. It's not like the phone was right in his face every time he opened the trunk. So, with all of this in mind, I'm left wondering, if my husband did take the devices intentionally, what would his motivation be? What could he possibly gain from hiding these things? Do I think it's possible that his ADHD led him to forget that he even took them? Is this just my mind spiraling out of control, or am I justified in my doubts? I don't know anymore. Update 1. The next morning, when her husband returned from the gym, she decided she couldn't stay silent about this any longer. She needed to confront him, though the feeling in her chest was hard to describe. Throughout the day, she had tried to convince herself that maybe it was all just a coincidence, that her husband could really have forgotten where he had placed the items in such strange places, but a part of her couldn't escape the feeling of doubt. When he entered the house, she sat on the couch, gripping tightly the iPhone she had found the night before. She looked at him and began, her voice soft but unable to hide the tension. I need to talk to you about something. I've been thinking a lot about the lost phones and iPad this past week, and I just found our son's iPhone in the trunk of your car. I don't understand how it got there. Her husband looked at her with a confused expression, but there was also a hint of panic. He sat down across from her, and she could see the visible unease in his eyes. You can't say that you hid them, right? You couldn't have known that he left them somewhere? She bit her lip, her hands shaking as she looked into his eyes. I don't think you would do that, right? There must be some reason I don't understand, but why didn't you tell me when the iPhone went missing, or do you not remember anything? Her husband stayed silent for a long while, then sighed. You think I would hide his things? My trunk is really just a mess that I never pay attention to, and if I happen to leave his stuff in there, I truly don't remember. The mother felt his explanation like an arrow piercing through her doubts, but even if she could empathize with his carelessness, she still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling within her. Then what do you think about the previous times when the iPad and iPhone were lost? Did you ever notice him losing his things and not question it? She couldn't keep her worries inside any longer, and it felt like a wave she couldn't calm. Her husband looked at her with respect, but his silence lingered for a few more seconds. I didn't think much about it, really. I didn't want to put more pressure on him because I know he's been through so much already. And about the iPhone, you can say I might have forgotten where I left it, but it's not because I wanted to hide anything. She could feel his sincerity in his words, but she still couldn't get rid of the feeling of insecurity inside her. I don't know anymore, but I think we need to do something to make sure our son doesn't have to suffer anymore. Can you help me? He looked at her, then nodded. I'll help. We'll figure out how to handle everything. I don't want you to feel worried about him. In that moment, even though her heart was still full of questions, at least she saw a glimmer of hope, that they could find a way to help her son face this uncertainty on his own. Update 2. The doubt inside me didn't fade easily. I tried to let reason win over emotion, but my heart kept pounding, as if something bigger was hidden beneath. He looked at me, his eyes full of fatigue and confusion, but I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Can you tell me, really, is there something wrong? I asked, my voice tense to the point I couldn't control it. I just can't understand, why is everything like this? Our son's iPhone, the iPad, and all the other things I found, it's like they were hidden, forgotten, and no one remembers what happened to them. He didn't answer immediately. He stayed silent, looking at me as if contemplating something, but I felt his silence only added to the tension in the room. I could feel the tension rising between us, an irreparable crack unless we faced the truth. Honey, don't you understand? Our son has already suffered so much. I can't let him continue living in this uncertainty. Why can't you help him? And why are you letting these things keep disappearing like this? I nearly shouted, my words burning like fire in my chest. You've seen what he does. Do you see him struggling to remember simple things? Do you know he doesn't ever trust himself anymore because you always deny everything he says? My anger exploded, and I saw his eyes start to change. A little panic, a little fear, and finally, an undeniable confusion. He stood up, his hands shaking as if not knowing what to do with himself. What are you talking about? He stammered, his voice becoming hoarse. I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't hide his things. I really don't remember leaving the phone or the iPad anywhere. A heavy silence enveloped the room. I felt like I had lost everything I thought I knew about him. Still, I had to face what was happening. Do you know that every time our son loses something, I feel like I've failed? And now you're standing here and saying you don't remember? Are we living in chaos? I can't keep living in this limbo. You can't keep hiding things from me? Suddenly, he looked at me with a different look. Not confusion, but a terrifying truth I had never seen in him. I didn't hide his things, but you need to understand, there's something I can't say. I felt my blood freeze. What is it? What are you hiding? He looked at me, his eyes filled with sadness and weight. It's not that I forgot, it's that I'm afraid if you knew, you'd never forgive me. In that moment, everything seemed to stop. My heart seemed to stop beating. Afraid you wouldn't be forgiven? Afraid of what? He sighed, unable to look me in the eyes. Because I saw our son lose his phone and iPad, and I took them. I didn't want him to take responsibility for losing them because he wasn't ready. I just didn't know how to explain it to you. I wanted to protect him, and that's why I hid them. A shock hit me like lightning. Everything I thought I understood about him shattered into pieces. You took his things? You did that without telling me? Why would you do that? Our son has already suffered enough. He stayed silent, as if not knowing what to do. I felt my anger rising inside me, but I couldn't stop. You have to tell me the truth right now. You have to explain why you did that, why you hid everything. And in that moment, I realized that not only my son needed saving, this relationship was also on the brink, needing a clear explanation before everything collapsed. Update 3. The feeling inside me right now was like shattering into pieces. Nothing could mend it. The anger inside me slowly turned into pain, because I knew even if I understood why he did what he did, I still couldn't accept what he had done. The love and trust I had given him were now like a broken glass, impossible to piece back together. You've ruined everything, I whispered, my eyes starting to sting. Our son needs a responsible father, not someone who hides and covers up the truth. He stood still, not knowing what to say, unable to find any words to make it right. I looked at him, my eyes full of disappointment and pain. I can't live in a relationship without truth, without trust. You've gone too far. He said nothing, only bowed his head, his hands trembling, not daring to touch me. Each second that passed felt like an eternity. I knew that from this moment on, we couldn't go back. Everything had changed, not because we didn't love each other anymore, but because nothing could be rebuilt from lies and wrong decisions. I can't keep living like this, and our son can't either. I can't forgive you, not because you were wrong, but because I feel so deeply betrayed. And as I walked away, not looking back, I knew we were over. There would be no healing for these wounds, only emptiness and pain that could never be filled. In the house that was once full of laughter, now there was only silence, cold, and no one left together anymore. Update 4. Sometime later, he and I had both moved on, but not in the way I had imagined. The breakup didn't come suddenly, but rather it was a gradual drift, little by little each day, until we both realized that we were no longer meant for each other. It was hard to call it the end because the memories still lingered, quietly following me in every moment. But I knew I could no longer go back. My son, though he didn't say it, I knew he was struggling with the big changes in his life. He had endured so much, but he continued to stay strong in his own way. Every time I looked into his eyes, I saw the pain, the fatigue, but also a glimmer of hope. Even though sometimes he still forgot simple things, I could still see in him the resilience I had always admired. He, after we parted ways, perhaps had found his own way to heal. I knew he was trying to make up for his mistakes, but some things can't be easily fixed, especially when the loss is so great. He still kept in touch with our son, though not often, but I could sense that he was trying to make amends, being there when our son needed him, even if only for brief moments. There was one time, after months without seeing each other, he called me, his voice full of hesitation and worry. What do you think if I take our son to visit his grandparents again? He deserves a better memory. I was silent for a moment, feeling everything that had passed. You can take him, but only if you're truly ready to be the father he needs. Not just when you feel guilty, but always. I didn't know if our relationship could ever return to what it once was, but I had accepted that sometimes wounds never fully heal. The most important thing was that my son and I were learning to live without holding on to what had been lost. Life went on, day by day, and even though I no longer had him by my side, I knew I would always protect my son, helping him learn how to face every challenge with strength. In the end, I realized that although the wounds may never fully fade, time will help us accept and find a new way to live, no matter the circumstances. Update 5. One day, a few months after we had separated, I still couldn't shake the pain and doubt. I tried to forget everything, but the memories of the lost phones and iPads still haunted me. My son had started to adjust to the new life, but in his eyes I could still see confusion and sometimes deep hurt. There were times I wondered if I was doing the right thing by letting everything fall apart like this. One afternoon, while I was cleaning up in the living room, I accidentally found an old stack of papers carelessly left on my ex-husband's desk. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but then my eyes stopped on a particular page, a copy of a phone bill with his name on it, showing long calls to a strange number. These calls had been ongoing throughout the months when my son's phone had been missing. My heart started pounding, and I couldn't ignore the strong urge to dig deeper. The feeling of doubt resurfaced. I could no longer live in this uncertainty. I decided to investigate further. A week later, I found another clue, a car key he'd never mentioned before. I remembered that after my son lost his iPhone, I found it in his car trunk, but he'd always denied knowing how it got there. Now, this key felt like a missing piece of the puzzle, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. The truth was starting to emerge, and I knew I couldn't avoid facing it. One evening, when my son had gone to bed, I called him. This time, I couldn't stay silent any longer. Can you tell me again? All of this, why did you hide it from me? My voice trembled, thick with the emotions I had buried. He was silent for a moment, then spoke in a soft, shaky voice. So you've found everything now. You can't understand why I did this. I made a mistake, I know. I didn't want our son to bear the mistakes he couldn't foresee. To protect him, I felt the pain in his words, but it couldn't change the reality. You hid everything so our son wouldn't have to take responsibility for the lost things. You didn't want him to think he was irresponsible, but you were wrong. You were wrong for not telling me, wrong for hiding everything. He sighed, his voice barely audible. I didn't want him to think he didn't deserve the things he had, but I didn't know what else to do. I was afraid that if you knew, you wouldn't forgive me, that all my mistakes would push him away. His words stunned me. I couldn't imagine him going this far to hide things, but a part of me understood his concern for our son. However, that didn't excuse his actions.
Don't you get it? The truth is the only thing we can trust right now. You can't keep hiding it, I said, my voice breaking as tears filled my eyes. He doesn't need protecting from his own mistakes. He needs to learn to face them, and you didn't give him that chance.
Silence fell over the room. I realized that we had gone too far, and while the feelings were still there, these wounds couldn't be healed easily. I understood that the truth isn't always easy to face, but in that moment, I realized that all I needed was honesty, no matter how painful. We didn't say anything else. Everything had been said, but nothing could change what had happened. Our relationship, like the lost phones, was now nothing more than broken pieces that could never be put back together.